Marcus Williams pushed his worn mop bucket down the pristine marble hallway of Blackstone Corporate Tower, the squeaking wheel echoing through the 42nd floor like a broken record. The expensive Italian leather shoes clicked past him without acknowledgement, their owners treating him as invisible as the dirt he cleaned from their world. "Watch where you're going, janitor," sneered Bradley Westbrook, adjusting his $1,000 tie as he stepped around Marcus's cart. The man's cologne was so strong it could choke a horse, but Marcus had learned long ago to keep his head down and his mouth shut. Marcus had been cleaning these same floors for 3 years now, ever since his construction company went under during the recession. At 52, starting over wasn't easy, especially when you had a teenager to support. But David needed him, and pride didn't pay the bills. The elevator dinged, and out stepped Jonathan Pierce, the company's golden boy. Fresh out of Harvard Business School, Pierce had the kind of confidence that came from never having to worry about rent money. His eyes landed on Marcus with undisguised disgust. "Excuse me," Pierce said, his voice dripping with condescension. "Could you move that equipment? Some of us have actual work to do." Marcus stepped aside, watching as Pierce's polished shoes clicked past. The young executive paused, turning back with a cruel smile. "You know, Williams, I've been thinking, maybe it's time this building upgraded to a more professional cleaning service, one that doesn't leave water streaks on the windows." Heat rose in Marcus's chest, but he forced his voice to remain steady. "I'll make sure to be more careful, sir. See that you do." Pierce's laugh was sharp as broken glass. "Some people just aren't cut out for quality work, are they?" The other executives gathered around Pierce chuckled, their laughter bouncing off the marble walls like bullets. Marcus gripped his mop handle tighter, knuckles white with suppressed anger. These people had no idea what real struggle looked like. As the group disappeared into the conference room, Marcus returned to his work, his movements more aggressive than necessary. The truth was, he'd been thinking about David's college applications, about how his son deserved better than watching his father scrub toilets for people who wouldn't spit on him if he were on fire. The afternoon dragged on, each snicker and whispered comment cutting deeper than the last. Around 3 o'clock, Marcus was cleaning the executive washroom when he overheard Pierce on his phone. "No, Mother, I told you I'm not bringing anyone to the charity gala. Why would I want to be seen with—" Pierce paused, noticing Marcus's reflection in the mirror. His voice grew louder, more theatrical. "With someone beneath our social standing? Some people need to know their place." Marcus's hand trembled as he wiped down the sink. 30 years of hard work, of building homes and raising a son alone, reduced to nothing more than entertainment for spoiled rich kids. The day finally ended, and Marcus gathered his supplies, his back aching from bending over toilets and scrubbing floors. As he waited for the service elevator, the main doors opened to reveal a young man in an expensive but understated suit. Unlike the others, this man had kind eyes and calloused hands that spoke of actual work. "Good evening," the stranger said, nodding respectfully to Marcus. "Evening, sir," Marcus replied, surprised by the courtesy. The young man glanced around the empty hallway, then leaned closer. "I couldn't help but notice some of the staff here aren't treating you with proper respect." Marcus stiffened. "Great, another rich kid looking for gossip. I'm fine, sir, just doing my job." "I'm sure you are, and I'm sure you do it well." The man's smile was genuine. "I'm Alexander, by the way. Alexander Chen." The name meant nothing to Marcus, but he nodded politely. "Marcus Williams. Mr. Williams, I have a feeling we'll be seeing more of each other." Alexander's eyes held a strange warmth. "Have a good evening." As Alexander disappeared into the executive suite, Marcus shook his head. Rich people and their games. He'd learned not to trust kindness from anyone wearing a suit that cost more than his monthly salary. The next morning brought more of the same. Pierce and his cronies had apparently made Marcus their favorite target, their comments growing bolder and crueler with each passing hour. "Hey, Williams," Pierce called out during the lunch rush. "My shoes could use a shine. Think you could handle that? Or is it above your skill level?" The other executives burst into laughter, their voices carrying across the entire floor. Several employees looked up from their desks, some with pity, others with the cold indifference of people afraid to become targets themselves. Marcus's jaw clenched. "I'm not a shoeshine boy, Mr. Pierce. I'm a janitor." "Oh, excuse me. A janitor." Pierce's voice oozed mockery. "How prestigious. I'm sure your family is so proud." The mention of family hit like a physical blow. Marcus thought of David, working 2 part-time jobs to help pay for his own school supplies, never complaining about wearing secondhand clothes or eating generic brand cereal. "At least I raised my son to treat people with respect," Marcus said quietly, immediately regretting the words as soon as they left his mouth. Pierce's eyes lit up with malicious glee. Did this janitor just give me attitude? He turned to his audience, arms spread wide. Can you believe this? The help thinks he can talk back to his betters. The crowd of executives pressed closer, sensing blood in the water. Marcus realized he'd made a terrible mistake. These people could have him fired with a phone call, and then what would happen to David's college dreams? I apologize, Mr. Pierce, Marcus said, forcing the words through gritted teeth. I spoke out of turn. Yes, you did. Pierce stepped closer, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the hallway. And now you're going to clean my shoes. Right here, right now, so everyone can see what happens when the hired help forgets its place. The silence that followed was deafening. Marcus looked around at the faces surrounding him, some eager for entertainment, others uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. This was it, the moment where he either sacrificed his dignity or lost his job. He was reaching for the cleaning rag in his cart when the elevator dinged again. What exactly is happening here? The voice was quiet, but carried absolute authority. Every head turned to see Alexander Chen stepping out of the elevator, his expression unreadable. Pierce straightened, suddenly uncertain. Oh, Mr. Chen, we were just having a discussion with the cleaning staff about proper procedures. I see. Alexander's gaze moved slowly around the circle of executives, each one shrinking slightly under his scrutiny. And these procedures involve public humiliation? Well, no, of course not, but Mr. Pierce. Alexander's voice cut through the stammered excuse like a blade. I think you have work to attend to. The dismissal was polite but absolute. Pierce looked around for support, finding none. One by one, the executives melted away, suddenly remembering urgent meetings and important calls. Within moments, Marcus and Alexander stood alone in the hallway. Are you all right, Mr. Williams? Alexander asked, his concern genuine. Marcus nodded, not trusting his voice. The humiliation burned in his chest, made worse by the kindness of this stranger. Good. Alexander paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Would you mind if we talked sometime? Perhaps over coffee? Marcus looked up, confused. I don't understand, sir. Alexander smiled, and for just a moment Marcus saw something familiar in the young man's eyes, something that reminded him of David when he was trying to work up the courage to ask for something important. Let's just say I think we have more in common than you might realize. That evening, Marcus sat across from Alexander Chen in a small diner 6 blocks away from Blackstone Tower. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the cracked vinyl booths, a far cry from the gleaming corporate cafeteria where executives paid $20 for salads. Alexander had insisted on this place, claiming he knew the owner. Marcus watched suspiciously as the young man ordered black coffee and apple pie, wondering what game this rich kid was playing. You're wondering why I asked you here, Alexander said, stirring sugar into his coffee with steady hands. The thought crossed my mind. Marcus kept his voice neutral, years of disappointment teaching him caution. 3 years ago, I was washing dishes in a restaurant kitchen in Chinatown. Alexander's words hit Marcus like a physical blow. Before that, I was sleeping on park benches, eating from garbage cans, trying to figure out how to survive another day. Marcus studied the young man's face, searching for deception. The expensive suit, the confident manner, the way other executives treated him with respect. None of it matched the story he was telling. I don't understand, Marcus said finally. Alexander rolled up his sleeves, revealing scars across his forearms, the kind that came from hard labor, not tennis courts and country clubs. My adoptive father found me when I was 15, living on the streets after aging out of the foster system. He took me in, gave me a chance when no one else would. Adoptive father, Robert Chen. He built his fortune from nothing, started as a dishwasher just like I did. Alexander's eyes grew distant. He taught me that money doesn't make you better than anyone else. Experience does. Character does. The way you treat people when they can't do anything for you. That's what defines you. Marcus felt something shift in his chest, a crack in the wall he'd built around his heart. Why are you telling me this? Because I see something in you that reminds me of him. The way you handle yourself even when they're tearing you down. The quiet dignity. Alexander leaned forward. And because I think you might be exactly what I've been looking for. Before Marcus could ask what that meant, Alexander's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen, his expression growing serious. I have to take this, he said, stepping outside. Through the window, Marcus watched Alexander pace back and forth, his conversation animated. The young man's posture changed completely, from the casual confidence of their dinner to something more formal, more deferential. He was speaking Mandarin. Marcus realized, though he caught occasional English words. Father, business, important. When Alexander returned, his face was troubled. Everything all right? Marcus asked. My father's coming to town next week. Unexpected business trip. Alexander sat down heavily. He wants to meet with the Blackstone executive team, evaluate some potential partnerships. That sounds like good news. Alexander's laugh was bitter. You don't understand. My father built his empire by reading people, by seeing through facades and lies. He's going to take one look at Pierce and his cronies and know exactly what kind of people they are. Marcus began to understand. And that's bad for business? It's bad for everyone. When my father disapproves of a company's culture, he doesn't just walk away quietly. He makes sure everyone in the industry knows why. Alexander ran his hands through his hair. Blackstone could lose hundreds of millions in contracts. Thousands of people could lose their jobs. The weight of that revelation settled between them. Marcus thought about the security guards, the cafeteria workers, the administrative assistants, all the invisible people who kept the building running while the executives played their games. What does any of this have to do with me? Marcus asked. Alexander met his eyes directly. Because you're the only person in that entire building who treats everyone with respect. Security guards, secretaries, delivery drivers. I've watched you. You know everyone's name. Ask about their families. Actually listen when they talk. Marcus shifted uncomfortably. That's just basic decency. Exactly. And that's rarer than gold in corporate America. Alexander pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. I want to offer you a position. Assistant to special projects. You'd work directly with me. Help me understand the real culture of companies we're considering for partnerships. Marcus stared at the card. The salary figure at the bottom made his heart skip. This is 10 times what I make now. It's what the position is worth, and Marcus? Alexander's voice grew serious. My father values authenticity above everything else. When he meets you, he needs to see the same man I'm seeing right now. Not someone trying to impress him, not someone pretending to be something he's not, just you. That night, Marcus lay awake staring at the ceiling of his studio apartment. David was staying at a friend's house working on a group project, which meant Marcus was alone with his thoughts and fears. The business card sat on his nightstand like a loaded gun. Everything about the offer seemed too good to be true, and Marcus had learned long ago that when something seemed too good to be true, it usually was. But what if it wasn't? What if this was the break he'd been praying for? The chance to give David the future he deserved? The next morning at work, Pierce and his cronies were waiting. Well, Pierce said, blocking Marcus's path to the supply closet. Look who's been making friends with management. Marcus kept his expression neutral. I don't know what you mean. Oh, I think you do. Alexander Chen, asking questions about you. Very interesting questions. Pierce's smile was razor sharp. Did you really think we wouldn't find out? Find out what? That you've been feeding him information, trying to undermine the people who actually matter in this company. Pierce stepped closer. That's corporate espionage, Williams. Career-ending stuff. Marcus felt ice in his veins. I haven't done anything wrong. Haven't you? Meeting with Chen outside of work? Discussing company business with unauthorized personnel? Pierce pulled out his phone, scrolling through photos. Funny thing about smartphones, they take pictures from pretty far away. The photos showed Marcus and Alexander at the diner, their conversation looking far more conspiratorial than it had felt. Pierce had twisted an innocent meeting into something sinister. What do you want? Marcus asked quietly. I want you to remember your place. Chen might be slumming it with the help right now, but when it comes down to it, he's one of us. He'll throw you away the moment you become inconvenient. Pierce's voice dropped to a whisper. Decline whatever offer he made you. Stay in your lane. And maybe you get to keep your job. The threat hung in the air like poison gas. Marcus understood the implication. Cross Pierce, and he'd find himself not just fired but blacklisted throughout the industry. The rest of the day passed in a haze of conflicting emotions. Every time Marcus saw Alexander, the young man would nod respectfully, sometimes stopping to ask how he was doing. But Pierce's words echoed in his mind. He's one of us. That evening, as Marcus was preparing to leave, Alexander appeared beside his cart. Have you thought about my offer? Alexander asked quietly. Marcus looked around, making sure they weren't being watched. Can I ask you something? Of course. Why me? Really? You could hire anyone. College graduates, people with experience, people who actually know something about business. Alexander was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight that seemed far beyond his years. Because my father taught me that the most important business skill isn't reading spreadsheets or negotiating contracts. It's reading people, understanding what drives them, what they value, what they're willing to fight for. Alexander met Marcus's eyes. And in 3 years of watching this place, you're the only person I've seen who consistently puts human decency above personal advancement. If this part also touched your heart, tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this story. The weight of Alexander's words, the impossible choice Marcus faced, the cruel games of corporate power, it all came crashing down at once. I need time to think, Marcus said finally. Alexander nodded, understanding flickering in his eyes. Of course. But Marcus, don't let fear make the decision for you. I've learned that fear is usually just another word for other people's limitations, not your own. As Alexander walked away, Marcus realized he was standing at a crossroads that would define not just his future, but David's as well. The safe choice was to stay invisible, keep his head down, accept his place in the world's hierarchy. But safety, Marcus was beginning to understand, might be the most dangerous choice of all. Marcus spent the weekend in turmoil, pacing the cramped confines of his studio apartment like a caged animal. David had returned from his friend's house on Saturday morning, his backpack heavy with textbooks and his face bright with the enthusiasm that only 17-year-olds could maintain about calculus homework. "You seem different, Dad," David said, looking up from his physics notes spread across their small dining table. "Something happen at work?" Marcus paused in his pacing, studying his son's face. David had inherited his mother's sharp intuition along with her warm brown eyes. It was impossible to hide anything from him for long. "Just some changes coming up," Marcus said carefully. "Nothing you need to worry about." David set down his pencil, giving his father the full attention that always made Marcus feel simultaneously proud and terrified. This kid was going places, had already been accepted to 3 state universities with partial scholarships. All he needed was a father who didn't screw up his chances. "Dad, you know you can talk to me, right? I'm not a little kid anymore." The truth sat heavy on Marcus's tongue. How could he explain that their entire future hung on a decision he had to make by Monday morning? That he was being offered a chance that seemed too good to be true, by a young man who claimed to see something in a middle-aged janitor that no one else had ever noticed? "I know, son. I know." Sunday morning brought unexpected clarity. Marcus was sitting in the back pew of St. Mary's Community Church, listening to Pastor Rodriguez speak about taking leaps of faith, when his phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Mr. Williams, this is Alexander. My father arrived early. He wants to meet you this afternoon if possible. No pressure, I know it's your day off, but the opportunity is here if you want it." Marcus stared at the message, his heart hammering against his ribs. Around him, the congregation sang hymns about trusting in divine providence, their voices rising toward the stained glass windows that cast rainbow patterns across the worn wooden floors. He texted back, "What time and where?" The address Alexander sent was for a modest hotel downtown, not the luxury high-rise Marcus had expected. The Riverside Inn was the kind of place traveling salesmen stayed, clean but unremarkable, with a small restaurant that served decent coffee and better conversation. Marcus arrived 15 minutes early, his best shirt pressed and his shoes polished until they gleamed. He'd spent an hour in front of his bathroom mirror, practicing handshakes and trying to imagine what the father of someone like Alexander might be like. What he found was a man in his 60s sitting alone at a corner table, wearing jeans and a simple button-down shirt. Robert Chen looked like he could have been any of the construction supervisors Marcus had worked with over the years. Weathered hands wrapped around a coffee cup, eyes that had seen too much but still held kindness. "Mr. Williams?" Robert stood, extending his hand. His grip was firm, calloused. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." "Thank you for the invitation, sir. Please, sit. And call me Robert." The older man gestured to the chair across from him. "Alexander speaks very highly of you. He's a good man, your son." Robert's smile was warm but appraising. "Yes, he is, though I can't take credit for that. Life taught him character long before I found him." He paused, studying Marcus's face. "He tells me you understand something about that kind of education." Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment, the expectation that he would need to prove himself worthy of this man's time. But something in Robert's manner suggested this wasn't an interrogation. It was a conversation between equals. "I've had my share of hard lessons," Marcus said simply. "Tell me about your son." The question caught Marcus off guard. He'd expected inquiries about his work experience, his education, his plans for the future. Instead, Robert wanted to know about David. He's 17, top of his class, accepted to 3 universities already. He wants to study engineering, maybe go into renewable energy. Pride crept into Marcus's voice despite his efforts to stay professional. He's everything I could have hoped for in a son. And he's the reason you've stayed at jobs that don't challenge you, that don't pay what you're worth. It wasn't a question. Robert had already figured out the math. A single father taking whatever work he could find, sacrificing his own dreams to ensure his child had opportunities he'd never had. Stability matters, Marcus said, especially when someone depends on you. Yes, it does. But so does showing your children that dreams are worth fighting for. Robert leaned forward. Alexander tells me you turned down his job offer. I haven't turned it down. I just need to be sure I understand what I'm getting into. Robert nodded approvingly. Smart. Too many people jump at opportunities without understanding the cost. He pulled out his phone, scrolling to a photo. This was taken 32 years ago. The image showed a younger Robert Chen standing beside a food truck, his arm around a woman with a brilliant smile. Both were wearing aprons stained with grease, their faces exhausted but happy. My wife and I, our first business. We saved for 3 years to buy that truck, worked 18-hour days selling dumplings and noodle soup to construction workers. Robert's voice grew soft with memory. She died 2 years later. Cancer. Left me with a failing business and no idea how to move forward. Marcus felt the familiar ache of loss. I'm sorry. The point is, I understand what it means to be responsible for everything, to make decisions based on fear instead of possibility. Robert put his phone away. When Alexander was living on the streets, he could have made choices that seemed safer. Petty crime, joining gangs, accepting that the world had written him off. Instead, he chose to believe there was something better waiting. And there was, because he was willing to take the risk. Because when I offered him a place in my family, he chose to trust someone who had no obligation to keep his promises. Robert's eyes met Marcus's directly. Alexander sees that same courage in you. The question is whether you see it in yourself. Before Marcus could respond, Alexander himself appeared at their table, slightly out of breath. Sorry I'm late, he said, sliding into the third chair. Board meeting ran long. How did it go? Robert asked. Alexander's expression darkened. About what we expected. Pierce and his team presented their quarterly numbers, took credit for improvements they had nothing to do with, and made it very clear they see our potential partnership as a validation of their approach, which is, results at any cost. Employee satisfaction is irrelevant as long as productivity stays high. They actually bragged about their low overhead costs, which apparently include paying cleaning staff and maintenance workers below market rates. Marcus felt heat rise in his cheeks. He was part of that low overhead, part of the cost savings these executives used to boost their bonuses. Robert was watching his reaction carefully. What do you think, Marcus? Is that an accurate assessment of the company culture? The moment of truth had arrived. Marcus could play it safe, give diplomatic answers that wouldn't offend anyone. Or he could tell the truth about what it was really like to work at Blackstone Tower. They treat people like disposable equipment, Marcus said quietly. The security guards, the cafeteria workers, the cleaning staff, we're invisible to them until we make a mistake. Then suddenly, we're very visible and very expendable. Give me an example. Marcus thought about Pierce's daily humiliations, about the executives who stepped over him like he was furniture, about the systemic cruelty disguised as corporate efficiency. Last week, one of the night security guards, his name is Miguel, been working there for 8 years. His wife was in the hospital having complications with her pregnancy. He asked for 2 days off to be with her, unpaid time that he'd earned according to company policy. Marcus's voice grew steadier as he continued. Pierce denied the request, said it would set a bad precedent. Miguel had to choose between his job and his family. What did he choose? His family. He was fired the next day for unauthorized absence. Robert and Alexander exchanged a look that spoke volumes. In that moment, Marcus realized this wasn't just about a job offer. It was about something much larger. Marcus, Robert said slowly, what would you say if I told you that we're not just considering a partnership with Blackstone? We're considering acquiring it entirely. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. An acquisition meant complete restructuring, new management, fundamental changes to everything about how the company operated. I'd say a lot of people's lives are about to change, Marcus replied, including yours. The question is whether you want to be part of shaping that change or watching it happen to you. If you want to keep hearing stories like this, tap the red button that says subscribe. It's free, and it helps me keep sharing these moments that matter. Marcus looked around the modest restaurant, at the father and son who had somehow found each other across impossible odds, at the opportunity that hung in the air like a bridge across a chasm. "What exactly would you need me to do?" he asked. Alexander leaned forward. "Help us understand who deserves to stay and who needs to go. Not based on their resumes or their quarterly reports, but based on how they treat people when they think no one important is watching. You want me to spy on my coworkers? We want you to tell the truth about what you've already seen," Robert corrected gently. "The difference is this time people will listen." Marcus thought about Miguel's wife, about David's college applications, about all the small cruelties and casual indignities he'd witnessed and endured. He thought about Pierce's smug face, about the executives who treated human beings like line items on a budget. "When would I start?" he asked. The smile that spread across Alexander's face was brighter than sunrise. Monday morning arrived with the weight of destiny pressing down on Marcus's shoulders. He stood in front of his bathroom mirror at 5:30 a.m., adjusting the navy blue tie that Alexander had insisted he wear. The reflection staring back at him looked like a stranger. Gone was the janitor's uniform, replaced by a crisp white shirt and charcoal slacks that fit better than anything he'd owned in years. David appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "Whoa, Dad. You look different. Feel different too," Marcus admitted, his voice tight with nerves. Good different or bad different? Marcus thought about that for a moment. The fear was still there, coiled in his stomach like a living thing, but underneath it was something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. "We'll find out." The elevator ride to the 42nd floor felt eternal. Marcus's new key card, his first ever with executive access, trembled slightly in his palm. When the doors opened, he stepped into a world that looked exactly the same but felt completely different. His old cleaning cart still sat in the supply closet, abandoned like a discarded skin. The sight of it hit him harder than he'd expected. For 3 years, that cart had been his anchor, his identity, his place in the world's rigid hierarchy. Second thoughts? Alexander appeared beside him, immaculate as always in his tailored suit. "More like third and fourth thoughts," Marcus admitted. Alexander smiled, the kind of expression that suggested he understood exactly what Marcus was experiencing. "My father always says the best decisions feel terrifying right up until they feel inevitable. And how do you know when that happens? When you realize you couldn't live with yourself if you didn't try." They walked together toward the executive suite, past the familiar faces that had become part of Marcus's daily landscape. The security guard at the reception desk did a double take, his eyes widening in recognition and confusion. The secretary, who had never once acknowledged Marcus's existence, suddenly scrambled to her feet. "Good morning, Mr. Williams," she said, her voice unnaturally bright. "Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" The transformation was instantaneous and unsettling. These same people who had looked through him like glass were now treating him with the desperate courtesy reserved for those who held power over their paychecks. "I'm fine, thank you," Marcus said quietly, the words feeling strange in his mouth. Alexander led him to a corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. The nameplate on the door read, "Marcus Williams, Assistant to Special Projects." "This is yours," Alexander said, opening the door to reveal a space larger than Marcus's entire apartment. "At least until the acquisition is complete." Marcus stepped inside, running his fingers along the mahogany desk that dominated the room. A computer terminal sat ready for use, its screen displaying more processing power than he'd ever had access to. File cabinets lined one wall, their contents mysterious, but important looking. "I don't know the first thing about being an executive," Marcus said, the admission feeling like defeat before he'd even begun. "Good," Alexander replied. "The last thing we need is another person who thinks like they do." The morning passed in a blur of introductions and orientations. Alexander walked Marcus through the company's organizational structure, explaining how decisions flowed from the executive committee down through layers of middle management to the people who actually did the work. "Your job," Alexander explained, "is to help us understand the real story. Not the sanitized version they present in board meetings, but what actually happens in the break rooms and supply closets and places where people think they can speak freely." It sounded simple enough, but Marcus was beginning to understand the complexity involved. He wasn't just changing jobs. He was switching sides in a war he'd never fully understood he was fighting. Around noon, Pierce appeared in Marcus's doorway like a storm cloud seeking shelter. Well, Pierce said, his voice dripping with false congratulations. "Look who's moving up in the world." Marcus looked up from the employee handbook Alexander had given him. Pierce's smile was sharp enough to cut glass, his posture radiating the kind of aggressive confidence that came from years of never being challenged. "Hello, Mr. Pierce. Please call me Bradley. We're colleagues now, after all." Pierce stepped into the office uninvited, his eyes taking in every detail like a general surveying enemy territory. Quite a promotion. From janitor to executive in one weekend. That must be some kind of record. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Marcus felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising in his chest, but this time it was accompanied by something new, the realization that he no longer had to accept this treatment. "I suppose it is unusual," Marcus said carefully. "Unusual." Pierce laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "That's one word for it. I'm curious, Marcus. May I call you Marcus? What exactly qualifies someone with your background for a position like this?" The question was designed to wound, to remind Marcus of his place in the natural order. But as Marcus looked at Pierce's perfectly styled hair and designer suit, he found himself remembering Alexander's words about reading people, about understanding what drove them. Pierce wasn't just being cruel, he was afraid. "I suppose Mr. Chen values different kinds of experience," Marcus replied. "Sometimes the view from the bottom gives you perspective you can't get from the top." Pierce's smile flickered like a candle in the wind. "How philosophical. I'm sure you'll bring a very unique perspective to our executive team." "I hope so. Just remember, Marcus, perspective is one thing, results are another. In the corporate world, good intentions don't pay the bills." Pierce's voice dropped to the familiar whisper Marcus remembered from their encounters in the hallway. "And when Mr. Chen's father sees what kind of results his charity case actually produces, well, let's hope your old job is still available." After Pierce left, Marcus sat alone in his office, staring out at the city spread below. From this height, the people on the streets looked like ants, tiny and insignificant. He wondered if this was how all executives came to see the world, if elevation inevitably led to a kind of moral blindness. His computer chimed with an incoming email. The sender was someone named Patricia Hernandez from Human Resources, but the message was brief and cryptic. "Can we talk? Privately. It's about Miguel." Marcus stared at the screen, his heart rate accelerating. Miguel, the security guard who had been fired for choosing his family over his job. Marcus had mentioned him to Robert and Alexander, but he'd assumed that conversation would remain confidential. He typed back, "When and where?" The response came immediately. "Service elevator 20 minutes, come alone." The next 20 minutes felt like hours. Marcus tried to focus on the employee files Alexander had given him to review, but his mind kept wandering to worst-case scenarios. Was this a trap? Had Pierce somehow discovered his role in the potential acquisition? Was his corporate career about to end before it had really begun? At exactly 2:30, Marcus rode the service elevator down to the building's lower level. Patricia Hernandez was waiting in the maintenance corridor, a woman in her 50s with graying hair and intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Mr. Williams," she said, extending her hand. "Thank you for meeting me. What's this about?" Patricia looked around nervously, ensuring they were alone. "I know what you're really doing here. I know about the Chen acquisition." Marcus felt ice water in his veins. "I don't know what you're talking about. Please. I've been in HR for 15 years. I see the patterns, the subtle changes in hiring, the way certain executives suddenly become very interested in employee satisfaction surveys they've ignored for years." Patricia's voice was steady but urgent. "What I need to know is whether you're really going to help people like Miguel, or if this is just another corporate shell game." The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. In all his conversations with Alexander and Robert, he'd focused on the mechanics of the transition, the logistics of evaluation and change, but he hadn't fully considered what his new position meant to the people he'd left behind. "Miguel was a good man," Marcus said quietly. "What happened to him was wrong. Wrong doesn't begin to cover it. His wife lost the baby 3 days after he was fired. Stress complications, the doctor said." Patricia's voice broke slightly. "He's working 2 part-time jobs now, no benefits, trying to pay off medical bills that will bury them. What comes next is even stronger. And to not miss the ending, tap the subscribe button now. It's free, and you'll be with me in every new story." The weight of responsibility settled on Marcus's shoulders like a lead blanket. This wasn't just about corporate restructuring or business efficiency. Real people's lives hung in the balance. People whose names would never appear in quarterly reports or board meeting minutes. "What do you need from me?" Marcus asked. "I need to know that when the dust settles, someone will remember the people who got crushed along the way. I need to know that Miguel and the others like him will get a chance to tell their stories to someone who actually has the power to do something about it." Marcus thought about his comfortable new office, his executive access, his sudden elevation from invisible to important. All of it felt hollow compared to the weight of Patricia's expectation. They will, he promised. I'll make sure they will. Patricia nodded, seeming to find something in his face that satisfied her. There's a group of us. Maintenance, security, cafeteria staff, cleaning crew. People who keep this place running while the executives take credit. We meet every Thursday after hours in Conference Room B on the 15th floor. Why are you telling me this? Because somebody needs to speak for the people who don't get to speak for themselves. And maybe, just maybe, you're that somebody. As Patricia disappeared back into the maze of maintenance corridors, Marcus realized that his transformation was far from complete. Changing clothes and offices was easy. Changing the fundamental structure of how power worked in corporate America, that was going to require something much more dangerous. It was going to require courage. Thursday evening found Marcus standing outside Conference Room B on the 15th floor, his hand hovering over the door handle like a man preparing to jump off a cliff. Through the frosted glass, he could see silhouettes, maybe a dozen people sitting around the oval table that during business hours hosted middle management meetings about quarterly projections and budget allocations. Taking a deep breath, Marcus pushed open the door. The conversation stopped immediately. 12 faces turned toward him, expressions ranging from curiosity to suspicion to outright hostility. Marcus recognized most of them. The overnight security team, 3 women from the cafeteria, 2 maintenance technicians, several members of the cleaning crew he'd worked alongside for 3 years. "Look what the cat dragged in," said Carlos Rodriguez, one of the janitors who'd started the same week as Marcus. Our old buddy, moving up in the world. The sarcasm in Carlos's voice was sharp enough to draw blood. Marcus had expected this reaction, but it still stung. These people had been his colleagues, his friends, his community during the hardest years of his life. "I asked him to come," Patricia Hernandez said from her seat at the head of the table. "Sit down, Marcus, we have things to discuss." Marcus took an empty chair between Rosa Martinez from the cafeteria and James Patterson, a security guard who'd always shared pictures of his grandchildren during their brief encounters in the elevator. "So," Carlos continued, his arms crossed over his chest, "how's life in the executive suite? Must be nice looking down on all us little people." "Carlos," Patricia warned, but Marcus held up a hand. "No, he's right to be angry," Marcus said. "From where you're sitting, it looks like I sold out. Like I abandoned the people I worked with to join the people who make our lives miserable. Didn't you?" The question came from Maria Santos, one of the night cleaners. Her voice was quiet but carried the weight of genuine hurt. "You were one of us, Marcus. You knew what it was like to scrub their toilets while they made jokes about us in the hallways." Marcus felt the familiar weight of judgment, but this time it came from people whose opinions actually mattered to him. These weren't corporate executives playing games with other people's livelihoods. These were his friends, his community, the people who'd shared their lunch breaks and family stories with him. "I did know what it was like," Marcus said slowly. "I still know, and that's exactly why I took the job." "Explain," James said, his deep voice cutting through the tension in the room. Marcus looked around the table at faces lined with exhaustion and worry, at hands calloused from years of hard work, at eyes that had seen too much disrespect and not enough hope. "How many of you know about the Chen acquisition?" he asked. Several people exchanged glances. Patricia nodded for him to continue. "Robert Chen is planning to buy Blackstone. Complete restructuring, new management, fundamental changes to how the company operates." Marcus paused, letting that sink in. "The question isn't whether change is coming. It's whether we have any say in what that change looks like." "And you do?" Carlos's skepticism was palpable. "You have a say?" "We do. All of us." Marcus leaned forward. "Alexander Chen isn't just some rich kid playing corporate games. He grew up on the streets, worked in restaurant kitchens, knows what it's like to be invisible to people in power. His father built his empire from nothing, starting as a dishwasher." "Pretty story," Carlos said. "But what does that mean for us?" "It means they're not interested in keeping the system the way it is. They want to know who deserves to stay and who needs to go, but not based on quarterly reports or executive presentations, based on how people treat each other when they think no one important is watching." The room fell silent. Marcus could see the wheels turning in their minds, hope warring with skepticism born from years of disappointment. "Miguel Vasquez," Patricia said quietly. "What happens to people like him?" "That's exactly why I'm here," Marcus replied. "Every story like Miguel's, every example of how the current system crushes people, they need to hear it. But not from me, from you." Rosa Martinez spoke for the first time. "You want us to talk to them? The Chen family? I want you to have a voice in what happens next." For 3 years, I've watched good people get ground down by a system that treats them like disposable equipment. Now we have a chance to change that system from the inside. Or get fired for speaking up, James pointed out. Maybe, but we're going to get fired anyway if nothing changes. At least this way we go down fighting. The next hour transformed the meeting from a confrontation into a strategy session. One by one, the employees around the table began sharing their stories. Not just their own, but accounts of colleagues who'd been passed over for promotions, denied time off for family emergencies, forced to work in unsafe conditions, or fired for minor infractions while executives who cost the company millions faced no consequences. Marcus took notes, his anger growing with each account. He'd known things were bad, but hearing it all laid out systematically revealed the scope of the institutional cruelty that had become normalized at Blackstone. There's something else, Patricia said as the meeting began to wind down. Something you need to know about Alexander Chen. Marcus looked up from his notes. What about him? I've been doing some research since you were promoted. Chen Industries isn't just another corporate acquisition firm. They specialize in buying companies with toxic cultures and completely rebuilding them from the ground up. That's good news, isn't it? Maybe. But they also have a reputation for being absolutely ruthless with existing management. When Chen Industries took over Meridian Tech 2 years ago, they fired every C-suite executive on the same day. No golden parachutes, no generous severance packages, just security guards escorting them out of the building. Carlos let out a low whistle. Pierce and his buddies have no idea what's coming. Which brings us to the real question, Patricia continued. How far are you willing to go to make sure justice actually gets done? Marcus thought about that as he rode the elevator back to his floor. How far was he willing to go? The Marcus Williams who'd cleaned these floors for 3 years would have been content to keep his head down, collect his paycheck, and hope for the best. But the man walking into the executive suite was discovering reserves of courage he'd never known he possessed. His office phone was ringing when he entered. The caller ID showed Alexander's extension. Marcus, we need to talk. My father wants to accelerate the timeline. 20 minutes later, Marcus found himself back in Alexander's office, facing both father and son across a mahogany conference table that probably cost more than Marcus's annual salary. The board meeting is tomorrow, Robert Chen said without preamble. We've decided to make our acquisition offer then in front of the full executive committee. Marcus felt his stomach drop. Tomorrow? I thought we had more time. So did we. But our due diligence has uncovered some irregularities in Blackstone's financial reporting. Nothing illegal, but enough creative accounting to suggest they're trying to inflate their value before a potential sale. Alexander leaned forward. We need your assessment now, Marcus. Based on everything you've observed, who in senior management deserves to survive the transition? The question hung in the air like a sword over Marcus's head. 3 years of daily humiliations flashed through his memory. Pierce's casual cruelty, the systematic devaluation of human dignity, the corporate culture that celebrated profit over people. None of them, Marcus said quietly. Robert raised an eyebrow. None? The entire senior management team is complicit in creating and maintaining a system that treats employees like disposable equipment. They might not all be as openly cruel as Pierce, but they all enable it through their silence. That's a serious accusation, Alexander said. It's a serious situation. Marcus pulled out his notebook, the one filled with stories from that evening's meeting. I have documentation, names, dates, specific examples of systematic abuse disguised as corporate efficiency. Robert Chen studied Marcus's face with the intensity of a man who'd built an empire by reading people correctly. You realize what you're recommending would mean the complete destruction of Blackstone's current power structure? Yes, sir, I do. And you're prepared to live with the consequences of that recommendation? Marcus thought about Miguel Vasquez, working 2 jobs to pay medical bills for a baby who didn't survive. He thought about Rosa Martinez, denied a raise for 3 consecutive years despite flawless performance reviews. He thought about all the invisible people who kept this building running while the executives took credit for their work. He thought about David, and what kind of world he wanted his son to inherit. I'm prepared to live with the consequences of not making it, Marcus replied. Robert Chen smiled for the first time since Marcus had known him, and it was like watching the sun rise over a battlefield. Then we understand each other perfectly, Robert said. Tomorrow, we go to war. As Marcus left the building that night, he realized he was no longer the same man who'd pushed a mop cart down these hallways. The janitor had died sometime between Monday morning and Thursday evening, replaced by someone he was still getting to know, someone who was about to help topple an empire built on other people's humiliation, someone who was finally ready to fight back. Friday morning arrived with the weight of destiny pressing against the windows of Blackstone Tower. Marcus stood in his office at dawn, watching the city wake up below him, knowing that by sunset nothing would ever be the same. The board meeting was scheduled for 10 a.m. in the executive conference room on the 45th floor, a space Marcus had never seen but had cleaned the floors leading to it countless times. Today he would walk through those doors as an equal, carrying the power to reshape the lives of everyone in the building. At 9:45, Alexander appeared at his door, immaculate as always, but with something different in his demeanor. There was a gravity about him that Marcus had never seen before, the bearing of someone preparing to claim a birthright. "Ready?" Alexander asked. "As I'll ever be." They rode the elevator in silence, Marcus's heart hammering against his ribs. When the doors opened on the 45th floor, they revealed a world of even greater luxury than Marcus had imagined. Marble floors so polished they looked like mirrors, crystal chandeliers that caught the morning light like frozen fireworks, oil paintings that probably cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. The conference room was a monument to corporate power. A massive oval table dominated the space, surrounded by leather chairs that could have served as thrones. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city, a constant reminder of how far above the world the people in this room believed themselves to be. Pierce was already there, of course, holding court with the other senior executives. His smile was predatory as he spotted Marcus entering with Alexander. "Well, look who's joining us," Pierce announced to the room. "Our newest executive, fresh from the janitorial ranks. How democratic of us." The other executives chuckled obediently, their laughter echoing off the marble walls. Marcus felt the familiar heat of humiliation rising in his chest, but this time it was accompanied by something else, the knowledge that Pierce's reign of casual cruelty was about to end. "Gentlemen, ladies," came a voice from the doorway. Robert Chen entered the room with the quiet confidence of a man who'd never needed to raise his voice to command attention. He was followed by a woman in her 40s carrying a briefcase and the look of someone who'd seen boardroom battles from every possible angle. "Thank you all for accommodating this meeting on short notice," Robert continued, taking a seat at the head of the table as if he'd always belonged there. "I believe you all know my son Alexander, and this is Sarah Kim, our head of legal affairs." Pierce straightened in his chair, his corporate instincts finally kicking in. "Mr. Chen, we're honored by your interest in Blackstone Industries. We've prepared a comprehensive presentation outlining our growth projections and strategic initiatives." "That won't be necessary," Robert interrupted gently. "We've completed our due diligence." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Marcus watched as the executives exchanged glances, their comfortable assumptions beginning to crumble. "I'm pleased to inform you that Chen Industries is prepared to make an acquisition offer," Robert continued. "We're willing to purchase Blackstone Industries for $2.3 billion, payable immediately upon completion of the transition." The number hung in the air like a thunderclap. Marcus saw Pierce's eyes widen with greed, saw the other executives begin to calculate their potential windfalls from stock options and severance packages. That's a very generous offer," Pierce managed, his voice thick with barely contained excitement. "I'm sure we can work out the detail." "Actually," Alexander spoke for the first time, his voice carrying a steel edge Marcus had never heard before. "The details are already worked out. The acquisition is contingent on a complete restructuring of senior management." The silence that followed was deafening. Pierce's face went through several color changes before settling on a shade of gray that matched the storm clouds gathering outside. "I'm sorry, what exactly do you mean by restructuring?" asked Helen Morrison, the CFO. Sarah Kim opened her briefcase, pulling out a stack of documents thick enough to stop a bullet. "It means that effective immediately upon acquisition completion, the entire senior executive team will be terminated. No severance packages, no transition periods, no golden parachutes." "You can't be serious," Pierce sputtered, his composure finally cracking. "We've built this company into what it is today." "Yes, you have," Robert agreed. "And what you've built is a toxic culture that treats human beings as disposable resources." He nodded to Marcus, who felt his moment of truth arriving like a freight train. With trembling hands, Marcus opened the notebook he'd carried into the meeting, the one filled with 3 years of observations and Thursday night's testimonials. "Miguel Vasquez," Marcus began, his voice steadier than he'd expected. 8 years of flawless performance reviews, fired for taking unpaid time off when his wife had pregnancy complications. She lost the baby 3 days later due to stress. Pierce's face flushed red. "You can't possibly base business decisions on isolated incidents." "Rosa Martinez," Marcus continued, not letting Pierce interrupt. Denied raises for 3 consecutive years despite perfect performance evaluations. Told that cafeteria workers should be grateful for steady employment. One by one, Marcus read the names and stories that had been invisible to boardroom discussions. Each account was another nail in the coffin of Pierce's leadership, another testament to the systematic cruelty that had become normalized at Blackstone. "This is ridiculous," Pierce finally exploded, slamming his hand on the table. "You're going to destroy a profitable company based on the complaints of janitors and cafeteria workers." The silence that followed Pierce's outburst was absolute. Even the other executives seemed to sense they'd just witnessed their colleague cross a line from which there would be no return. Robert Chen looked at Pierce with the expression of a scientist examining an interesting but distasteful specimen. "Mr. Pierce, you've just perfectly illustrated why this acquisition is necessary. I don't understand. You've just dismissed the concerns of the people who actually keep this building running as if their experiences don't matter, as if their dignity is less important than your quarterly bonuses." Robert's voice remained calm, but Marcus could hear the steel underneath. "That attitude is exactly what we're here to change." Alexander stood, his presence suddenly commanding the room in a way Marcus had never seen before. "For those of you who are wondering, let me be clear about something. My name is Alexander Chen, and I am the heir to Chen Industries. But more importantly, I spent 3 years of my adolescence homeless, sleeping in doorways, eating from garbage cans." The revelation hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus watched as the executives processed this information, their assumptions about Alexander crumbling in real time. "I know what it's like to be invisible to people in power," Alexander continued. "I know what it's like to have your worth measured by your address, your clothes, your ability to pay for a seat at the table. And I know what it's like to have someone see your potential when everyone else sees only your circumstances." He turned to look directly at Marcus, his expression warm with genuine respect. "Marcus Williams spent 3 years working alongside the people you've dismissed as irrelevant. He learned their names, asked about their families, treated them with the dignity you've systematically denied them. When I offered him a position, he didn't jump at the chance for personal advancement. He worried about the people he'd be leaving behind." Pierce made one last desperate attempt to regain control. "This is all very touching, but business is business. You can't run a company based on sentiment." "You're right," Alexander agreed. "You can't, but you can run a company based on respect for human dignity. You can create a culture where people's value isn't determined by their position in an arbitrary hierarchy." Robert Chen stood, his decision clearly made. "The acquisition will proceed as planned. Mr. Pierce, Ms. Morrison, Mr. Bradford, Mr. Thompson, you have until the end of business today to clear out your offices. You're making a mistake," Pierce hissed, his mask finally slipping completely. "These people don't deserve—" "Mr. Pierce," Marcus interrupted, his voice cutting through Pierce's tirade like a blade. "For 3 years you treated me like I was nothing. You humiliated me, dismissed me, made my life miserable for your own entertainment." Pierce's face went pale as he realized where this was heading. "But here's what you never understood," Marcus continued, standing to face his former tormentor. "I was never nothing. I was a father working to give his son opportunities. I was a man maintaining his dignity despite your best efforts to strip it away. I was someone worth knowing, worth respecting, worth believing in." Marcus paused, letting his words sink in. "And most importantly, I was always watching, always learning, always remembering. You taught me exactly what kind of leader I never want to become." Tell me from which place in the world you're listening to this story, because what happens next changed everything, not just for Marcus, but for everyone in that building. The security guards who arrived to escort Pierce and the other terminated executives from the building were the same ones who'd been invisible to them for years. Miguel Vasquez led the team. Robert Chen had hired him back that morning with a promotion to head of security and a salary increase that would finally let him pay off those medical bills. As Pierce was led past Marcus's office, he stopped, his face twisted with impotent rage. "You think this changes anything? You think putting on a suit makes you one of them? You're still just a janitor playing dress-up." Marcus looked at the man who'd made his life miserable for 3 years and felt nothing but pity. "No, Mr. Pierce," Marcus said quietly. "I'm something much more dangerous than that. I'm someone who remembers what it was like to be powerless, and now I have the power to make sure others don't have to experience what you put us through." 6 months later, Marcus stood in the same conference room, but everything had changed. The walls now displayed photos of employee achievements, community service projects, and company-sponsored family events. The massive table had been replaced with a circular one that eliminated the hierarchy of seating arrangements. Alexander, now officially CEO, was presenting the quarterly results to a board that included Patricia Hernandez, Carlos Rodriguez, and Rosa Martinez, former invisible employees who'd been promoted to management positions based on their leadership qualities and understanding of what made the company actually function. Employee satisfaction is at an all-time high, Alexander reported. Turnover has dropped by 78%, productivity is up 43%, and we've received the State Business Ethics Award 3 months running. David Williams sat in the gallery, home from his first semester at MIT on full scholarship, a scholarship funded by the Chen Foundation's new program for children of working families. He watched his father with pride that made Marcus's chest tight with emotion. After the meeting, as employees filtered out chatting about weekend plans and upcoming promotions, Marcus found himself alone with Robert Chen. "Any regrets?" Robert asked. Marcus thought about the question seriously. The man who'd started this journey was gone, replaced by someone stronger, more confident, more committed to justice than he'd ever imagined possible. "Only one," Marcus replied, "that it took me so long to realize that dignity isn't something other people give you. It's something you claim for yourself, and then fight to protect for everyone else." Robert Chen smiled, the expression of a man who'd found exactly what he'd been looking for. "Alexander was right about you," Robert said. "You really were exactly what we needed." As Marcus walked home that evening, past the doorways where Alexander had once slept, through the neighborhoods where hard-working people still struggled to make ends meet, he carried with him the knowledge that change was possible, that justice was achievable, that sometimes the most powerful thing in the world was simply refusing to accept that things had to stay the way they were. The janitor had become something he'd never expected to be, not just an executive, but a voice for the voiceless, a bridge between worlds, a living proof that in America, with courage and the right opportunities, anyone could rise. But more importantly, he'd learned that rising up meant nothing if you forgot to reach back down and help others climb.